everybody. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to need that. All right, so I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about what I'm doing now, what I have done, and how you guys can break into the industry in terms of sound and music, if that's what you're thinking about. So, all right, why am I here? I don't even know. I kind of just stumbled in, and they gave me a microphone. Yeah, so I've been sound designing and writing music for, how long does it say? 7 years and 5 years. Basically that has covered everything from short films to indie games to different prototypes on Kickstarter, and I have had a chance to talk with a lot of different industry veterans throughout those past 7 years, and just going to different studios and just hanging out for a day and seeing what they do, and they've been giving me input and advice about how to go about doing this. So my experience is basically because somebody else did this exact same thing to me, but it was one-on-one. All right, so I have been developing games for a long time, but by games I mean a lot of little indie projects and personal projects like this, something that you would build at the school, and through many, many different programs, just love programming, so whatever I could get my hands on, that's what I would use to make games. And yeah, everything from mobile to Xbox and PC, and now a little bit of Switch, but if they don't launch, it's okay, you still get experience doing it. And I spent 3 years working on a Star Wars fan film that was 76 minutes, and it had everything from full CGI green screens to the whole thing was custom sound design. We used a lot of libraries and sounds that we got from other sci-fi packs that you might see in like Transformers. A lot of those sounds are actually available to use, so we would get those libraries and then create our own sounds with it and put it in the movie to make it sound like Star Wars. And we also use the Star Wars sound still. So Ryan, can you click the link? You guys get a little bit of sample of the kind of stuff that I did. This is also through game sound design too. So you'll see a little bit of how it works in film and in games. All right, cool. So that was a little bit of sample. It was maybe a little bit hard to hear, so you couldn't hear a lot of the subtle sounds in there. There's a lot that goes into that in terms of making sure it sounds good in the headphones, or if you're listening on just stereo speakers. So how do you actually make that sound real or have a lot of weight to it, depending on what kind of speakers you're listening to. And so did it go ahead? Okay. Yeah, so that was a little sample. And in terms of composing, wait, is this the next slide? Yeah, so in terms of composing, been working on a film called First Lady, starring Nancy Stafford and Corbin Burnson. If you watch Psych at all, he's the dad in Psych. And Red Alliance is a game on Steam by Second Up Studios. If you follow any of the first-person shooters on Steam, you would see that game. And that one was a lot of fun. That was a 4-year project, writing music from start to finish. And it is when you're doing indie development, you're trying to figure out what the game is along the way. And a lot of working on games is figuring that out with the team. So you're not just going into a project and saying, okay, well, I'm just going to write your music, one and done, and then you never touch it again. A lot of times, if that is the case, they have already figured out everything, and even then, it's not even everything. So it's a very large collaborative process that you work with whoever the director is, or if it's just 2-3 people, and you're at the school. Like if you're making a game here, it's still the same thing, just on a smaller scale. So, Ryan, can you click the link? This is a little bit of the music from the game Red Alliance, some of the battle music. It's a first-person shooter, sort of Half-Life. Cool. So, a lot of different tracks over the game. That was just a combination of them. So you go to the next slide. And then the UI stuff is a bunch of different things. So on the Asset Store, I have this sort of UI brand that I work with called Slim UI Solutions, and we create complete menu packages for developers who are trying to make games quickly. It's used by over 6,000 people worldwide. A lot of them are in schools. So all over the country, I have a lot of students that are emailing me, asking me for support on a lot of these different packages because they use them for their school projects. So, and it's very common to see them in game jams too. So that's been pretty cool to see them pop up here and there at different game jams. So when they have reels, sometimes the UI just randomly shows up. Most everything that you want is just outside of your comfort zone. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you just sit around waiting for opportunities to come to you, it's never going to happen. A lot of success and a lot of what will define you is, and build character, is what you do when you're uncomfortable, when you're put in situations that you're not familiar with. And a lot of making it in any industry, not just games industry, is really going out there and really doing everything you can to succeed. And a lot of that is doing something that you might not be familiar with and experimenting, learning something new, going and talking to somebody. There's so much that you can do that will set you apart from everybody else. And it's very common if you go to different events, which I'll talk about some of the different events that you can go to really experiment with this concept. You can very quickly realize who's there to who really wants to succeed, who really wants to make it in the game industry, and who's sort of just kind of figuring it out and not really sure what they want, and it really makes a big difference. So it's very interesting to see that. So, sound design in games. What is it? Well, there are lots of different types of sound design, and sound design covers everything from, say, like, you're making a small 8-bit looking game or something, and you just want to throw in a couple cheap sound effects. Well, then it's sound design, because if you are collecting a coin and the coin makes a sound, okay, yeah, that could be sound design. If you make that sound effect, that's sound design. And then it goes all the way on the other side, which is something like, let's say, Battlefield, where you're running through a war zone and you have bullets flying by and you have this epic music in the background. It's this crazy, overwhelming experience. That's also sound design. And they are very different experiences, but it kind of all boils down to the same thing. It's just on a lot of different scales. So let's play some of the audio samples and show you a little bit of the differences between sound design and some really, really cool games. Make sure this is loud so we can hear it.
Get us offline.
So if you notice what all three of them, actually I'll go back. So if you notice the difference between all three of them is pretty substantial. They're very, very different types of games, all of them. One of them is sci-fi, so a majority of the sounds in Halo were all recorded and invented. A lot of those didn't exist. So the sound designers would go out, they would go and record sounds from all over the world and they would then mix it together, and they would create something that you don't know what these space weapons sound like. So they have to create these sounds and try and invent something that when you hear it, you say, oh yeah, that's what it would sound like. It's kind of when you watch Jurassic Park and you hear a dinosaur roar. It's not, we don't know that's what they sounded like, but now you watch it, you're like, yeah, that's what a dinosaur sounds like. How did they do that? I don't know. And Halo is very driven by music. So it's very famous for that. Battlefield, you heard the music in the background when you're running. It sounds like you're watching a movie. Many of you guys have seen Saving Private Ryan. It's very similar to that, except the Battlefield is in real time. And part of the reason why it sounds so realistic is the sound engine. That's what we're going to talk about. And Dead Space, it's completely driven by the environments around you. So everything that you're walking around in this very scary, if you don't know what it is, Dead Space is a third-person space horror game where you are in this ship, very, very close quarters. You're walking down hallways and you hear things running around you and things pop out of walls, and it's very realistic sounding. And that is all thanks to the sound engines. Now, what do they actually do? Well, that is what determines how you actually hear the sound and whether or not that sound is close to you, if it's far away. And if you are standing behind a wall, how does the engine determine what it actually sounds like when you're behind the wall? So if you hear a monster running down the hallway, it will sound different if there's a door right here. If I'm inside the hallway, I will hear one thing, but if I'm inside the room, you will hear something down the hall. And that's what makes it really, really immersive. And Dead Space does that really, really well. And all the other games, including everything else listed here, they all use this to some extent. Now, the difference between these games and the last three were that the last three all used custom sound engines. So they don't actually use these programs, but they all basically do the same thing. Now, Wise is very popular. It's free to use, so is FMOD. And it is what you will use to create your environments. So if you are using Unity or Unreal, there were a few other engines that I heard about you guys were using. These programs work very well with a lot of different game engines, and it is what can really make your game stand out from being good to amazing. Because there's a lot of games out there that are indie games, and they don't have a lot of crazy visuals and graphics, and even much to the game themselves, but the sound design is amazing, and it really, really sells the experience. So Destiny, a lot of open spaces. If you are walking inside, so show of hands, how many of you guys know what Destiny is? Okay, awesome. All right, so you know in Destiny when you are inside of a room and you're firing a gun and let's say the Fallen are roaring at you, if you walk outside of the doorway, you will instantly hear the sound open up. And you can hear lasers being fired from 300 feet away, and you can hear when you're driving around in your speeder bike, just in the distance you can hear something happening, one of the public events. And you can drive to it and you realize, oh, okay, there it is. Now, how do they do that? How can you actually hear it? And as you get closer to it, it starts to sound closer. It starts to echo less. It starts to sound like it's actually getting closer to you. And it's very impressive how they do that with a very, very large open space. Resident Evil is the opposite. It's not known for large open spaces. It's very, very tight corners, and they do the opposite. So a lot of it is very hallway driven. A lot of their sound design is creepy, cracks in the walls as you're walking by. You're walking the feet, the ground's creaking, and then the wall explodes, and the guy comes out with the sledgehammer. And it's a lot of jump scares, but a lot of it is all based in these very small spaces. And it tricks you. It tricks your mind because you're hearing things that you can't even tell. Is it the sound engine that is creating these fake echoes of something in the distance, or is it actually the sound designer that created the sound? That's part of being a sound designer, is you have to determine when do I actually make the sound and when do I fake it with effects? How does this work with the game designer? If the game designer is changing the map and you made one effect for the hallway and then they completely change it and now it's a larger open space, well, you have to decide, okay, am I going to actually make the sound like it's in an open environment, or am I just going to try and use the engine and try to fake it? Battlefield is really good at tricking you because the gunfire, when you're hearing somebody in multiplayer, they're firing right in front of you, and if you step back, you will hear the sounds start to morph into each other, because they have 3 different sounds for the distance. You have the close firing, you have the sort of medium range, and then the one that's all the way in the distance, you just hear the cracks of the wind. And they morph between the 3 of them, which is actually similar how music composition works too, because how samples in music, when you're using orchestral samples or you're trying to play a violin sound, if you change how, or the style of how the violinist is playing the note, they tend to blend into each other, and that's also something that the sound engine does. Bioshock and Crisis. If you know Bioshock, it's an underwater city. The whole game takes place in an underwater city, and it's very, very believable. A lot of bubbly sounds, a lot of echoing through chambers. It sounds like there's a lot of pressure, a lot of low pressure in all the rooms that you walk through, and it's really impressive. And Crisis is very open space. Okay, so how do you actually get started? It's actually very easy. You just download it from the website, and you watch YouTube tutorials. So a lot of people don't realize that. Anything that you are not learning in the classroom, you can probably find it online on YouTube, because there are a lot of people that are actually trying to teach sound design, and it's very easy to get a hold of it. It's very affordable, which it wasn't the case 10 years ago. So it's because it's so easy to install and integrate into game engines. It's very easy to find it for Unity and Unreal, and they have some pretty decent tutorials about how to actually get it set up very quickly. So there's a lot of packages that people already made that are pre-made that you can just download and use as templates. So it makes it a lot easier, so you can actually jump into the fun part, which is actually designing the sound. You can download a lot of sound effects online. So for the Star Wars movie, we had a very small budget, but we raised $5,000 on Kickstarter. The whole movie itself costed about $8,000, which is insanely cheap for a movie of that scale. And we saved a very small fraction of that for the sound design budget. And we just bought a bunch of sci-fi sound effects, and then we ripped those apart and we take little chunks of it and little samples and then reverse it or add a bunch of effects on it to make it sound different. And that's how we created a lot of the sounds over the course of 3 years. Now, what's really important is that when you're learning, the way that you are going to grow is by practicing. But it's not just practicing, it's building a portfolio. Because if you're talking to somebody and they want to see what you're doing or they want to hear your work, you have to be able to have it ready for them. Because if you show that you're ready and you're showing that you have initiative, it doesn't just show them that you're serious about this, but it also helps you build really healthy habits, healthy working habits. And also, it helps you find out what you're good at and what you're not. When you're practicing, try to avoid repeating yourself. If you're trying to, say for example, if you're trying to make that creature running down the hallway and you want to have that sound effect, don't do it again. Once you do it once, go to something else. Because the skills that you learned from that and what you took away from that, apply it to the next project, and then the next one, apply it to the next one. And before you know it, you'll start building a portfolio of work that you're very proud of and that you can show somebody, which is an honest representation of who you are and what your skill level is and what you can do. And it's a very, very good way to find your limits and your strengths. Not everybody can do everything. And if you're designing, you're not going to be able to do everything. You know, the guys who are designing on Halo, they're not the same guys that are working on these indie games or working on, let's say, like Journey, the game Journey. So that game company made that game very sound driven, but very minimal though. There's not a lot of sound in the game. It's a very different experience than working on something like Halo or Battlefield. And having a website and a reel. So this goes along with building a portfolio. How do you actually show somebody what you're doing? Well, one thing is you're showing it on your phone or something. It's very common if you go to events and somebody's saying, oh, can I hear what you're doing? Or can I see your work? If you load it up, if you're able to show it, that's really important, but you shouldn't have to hold their hand. So if they can't look at it right in the moment and they go home and they can't find you online easily, or they can't watch your reel or hear what you're working on, that is a major disadvantage. So this is an example of my film composer reel. So Ryan, can you click on that? but I'll talk through while we're getting that set up. Yeah, so basically you just want to constantly be updating your footage or footage of your games that you've worked on. You take little samples, and as you upgrade and add more, you can play it. You'll see what I'll explain what I did here.
And you have no idea how little I care.
Just showing highlights of the music in the project because there's a lot of it, so I just took little samples of it.
Discovery is out there, and I can prove it too. I will find something new, even if I have to drive into the middle of the ocean, or my name isn't Nathaniel J. Lockwood. Drive? Like in a car? I hope he doesn't see my car! But
I think we get this meeting stuff. So the way this works is you just piece little samples from your work and you just put it back to back and you create a reel. And as you upgrade over time your skills and your portfolio builds, you then take out older projects and you just start replacing it with the newer stuff. So you show the newer stuff first, and then you kind of just start pushing it out, and then that's how you stay relevant. So all your work is already there, and it's the most honest representation of you. So we go back to the presentation. All right, so we are actually at the question break. There's no question? Yes?
So what would be good game design for something that's not super realistic? Like, good sound design for something that's not super realistic, something that's more arcadey, something that's more cartoony. What would make that?
The beauty of sound design is that it isn't limited to just really complex projects. A lot of sound design doesn't have to be, good sound design doesn't have to be making sure that everything sounds realistic depending on the environment, or if you're outside, making it sound like you're outside. That doesn't have to be what defines if it's good. Good sound design also just means, does it match the game? Does it feel like everything's working together and blending? Is there anything that's standing out in a negative way? So if you're playing a game and you don't notice the sound, they did an amazing job. So think about, in a game, your favorite game, do you actually think about the sound effects that you're hearing? Because if you are, you might just really love sound, but also something might not stand out and you realize, oh, well, that sound, I would have done it this way, or I think it sounds more like this other part of the game. But if you're not noticing it, then it's probably because they spent a lot of time making sure everything sounded like it was part of the same world. And a lot of good sound design just comes down to that. Does it work with the project? It's the same thing in film. If you're watching a film and you think, that doesn't sound right, it's because it's not good sound design. It just comes down to that. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm curious, so what's the difference in experience?
Say the first part again.
What's the difference in the experience of composing for film versus composing for
Okay, so the big difference between composing for film and for games is that film is a static picture that never changes. So when you are writing individually to each second, it never changes, and it's this coherent experience from start to finish. It's finite. In games, a lot of time you have to be a lot more dynamic. You have to be able to write to scenarios that are driven by the player. If you're doing cutscenes, it's a little different because in cutscenes, the music doesn't change in cutscenes either. But in QuickTime events, it does. So Call of Duty is very good at this. Call of Duty is known for having a lot of quick time events. I think they get a lot of people make fun of them for that a lot. But what they do is they have different sections of music, parts of one track that they just loop until the player makes some input. So if you just kind of leave and it says press X to do this action, and you just leave it there, the music's not going to stop. It'll keep running. But then as soon as you press X, then it smoothly transitions into the next phase. So a lot of sound design in games has to encompass a lot more possibility and variety. So it's different in that sense, but they both take a lot of work because when you're watching a movie, it's a very different experience than playing a game. And they both require a lot of collaboration between the director of the game or the movie, or whoever has a vision for the game, whoever's leading that vision. So music, I already alluded to music. Music is different than sound design, but a lot of it actually is a lot more like you would think. So this is one more track of game music. This is a theme song that I wrote for an online free-to-play shooter called Warmer Eyes, probably about 5 years ago. We don't have to play the whole thing, just play maybe 15 seconds. So that's another theme. Cool. All right, so what qualifies as video game music? It's a lot. There is everything from Destiny to Mario Kart to Dead Space, and then let's say Dance Dance Revolution. Dance Dance Revolution, it's not exactly a score, but it's also video game music. And they're all technically video game music. Now, what is it? Well, it's the soundtrack that accompanies the game. Is it really that simple? Yes and no. There is everything from cinematic to synthesized to chip tunes. Every game that you ever played has had this in some form. Now, a lot of games, they kind of get away with not having music, but you see this in every game has, everything's just getting bigger and bigger. So now, the line between movies and games has blurred. So a lot of music that you see in films is now become in games. And Destiny is an amazing example for this. Marty O'Donnell wrote an entire 50-something minute symphony for the music for Destiny. So he did it exactly right for the game. He just wrote all the music, and they took pieces out, and then they put that in the game, and not all of it was used. So he had just hours of music that didn't even make it in the game, and what he released at the end. Now, Destiny 1, Destiny 2 was different composers, but that's amazing because that is not really how games have worked in the past. And you get Mario Kart, which every track has music that is also recycled from their respective games that they come from. So that's really unique. And Dead Space uses it as a method to enhance the sound design. Dead Space is a unique example where the music is very, very deeply ingrained with the sound design. So Jason Graves is the guy that did Dead Space. He lives in North Carolina, so he gets hit by hurricanes all the time. And he stays home with his birds. And then a lot of the music in Dead Space is all texture-based. So texture is more feeling in the sound and just the grittiness of the score rather than something traditional, cinematic. Although he sort of blended the lines in some of the other games. So it's really scary, and then you're seeing something really scary, and the music's cinematic, and it's very weird how it all works, but it all blends together because they spent a lot of time all working together, the director, the sound designers, and the composer, to make sure that all the sound sounded like it was all one unit. And it makes the game a lot scarier, and it makes everything sound like it feels right. Now, dynamic music is sort of what I was mentioning about Call of Duty. Dynamic is where, let's say, in Destiny, when you're in a battle, music starts to play, and then when you exit a battle, it kind of calms down a bit, and then something else plays in the background. You don't always think about it, But there's that joke where if you walk into a room and the boss battle music starts playing and you don't see anything, you're like, oh, something's about to happen, something's about to go down. It's kind of that, but it gets very advanced because a lot of times you don't even notice when you're facing a boss with 3 different stages, like you kill him and you're like, yeah, and he comes back twice as powerful. The music tends to escalate slowly and you don't even realize it's doing it. So Red Alliance, the game that I showed you earlier, I had the opportunity to do that in that game because the final boss sequence of the game is a few different phases and the music just escalates slowly. It was getting more intense and things are on fire and zombies are coming out. You don't even know that it's happening, but the game just gets more and more intense. So it was really cool. All right, so how does it work? How do you actually make the music? Well, Digital Audio Workstation, or DAW, I don't know. I don't actually even know how to pronounce that. Nobody ever says DAW. People just say Audio Workstation or something. I don't know. That's an ongoing debate. Everybody says something different. But really, you are just trying to create music using whatever you have. Whatever software you are most comfortable with is the one that you should be using. There are programs like Cubase that are better for games because they allow you to be more individual with certain parts of the music to create something a little bit more dynamic. But you don't really need that, especially if you're just starting. If you're just trying to write music and compositions, you don't have to worry about all of that. And that's why it's very important, I like to say, that it is more important to invest in samples, not software. And what that means is Cubase is closer to $800. That's not really most student budgets. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out there that's like, yeah, okay, sure, I'll get it. It's not the point. Most people, that's not a good idea. Mixcraft is $130. So when I first started, I got Mixcraft. And I'm actually still using that now. That's not industry standard software. Nobody really knows what it is in the industry when they ask you, what are you using? I say, Mixcraft. They're like, what? Yeah, well, it was affordable. And what I did instead was, instead of spending the $800 on a program, I got comfortable with one that was cheaper because it did the job. I had a computer that was powerful enough to run it. And then instead, I invested the rest of the money into getting really high quality samples. And samples, if you don't know what they are, they're just the recordings of the instruments that you're using. So if somebody played a violin, they record all the notes of the violin, and then you purchase the pack of the violin notes. And then that's how you write your music, so it sounds very realistic. The music that you heard in my film reel was using very realistic samples that were recorded at Abbey Road Studios and over in LA. Some of them were custom, but the majority of them are from these other companies that spent a lot of time and a lot of money actually manufacturing them, which they are also used in a lot of major motion pictures today that you wouldn't even notice. It's very common to hear a lot of composers, let's say for the X-Men movies, a lot of the music in the X-Men movies is recorded live, but some of it is also computer samples. And you can't tell which ones they are because they did a really good job recording them. Now, when you're writing interactive music, that is one of the benefits of using the sound engines is that you can drop in the music into the software. And if you're doing this all yourself, it's easier to figure this out very quickly. But you are able to change what parts of the music is playing at one time, and then you can adjust between different phases of music. So if the battle's becoming more intense, you can change that dynamically, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So there's a little bit of sound design in the music too. And if there are a lot of sounds that are all playing at the same time, is your music overpowering the sound, or is the sound overpowering the music? That's also something to keep in mind. So it's a very, very important to remember that you have to be collaborating with whoever else is working on the audio team, because the music that you're writing might not work with their sound, and vice versa. How to get started? Very similar to sound design. Just download the program. A lot of these programs have free trials. I wouldn't recommend a lot of the expensive programs with free trials because once the trial runs out, what are you going to do? You wasted time learning a program that you're never going to use until you can afford it, and then by then you're already comfortable with the one that you have been using. So it's kind of a waste of time. So just download one that you feel comfortable with. Again, Mixcraft is one I use. There are others out there, as long as it can handle what you're trying to do. Do some research, figure out what kind of music you want to make, and you'll very quickly be able to figure out what software works best for you. A lot of YouTube tutorials. A lot of people write music composition tutorials, especially in terms of writing music and just understanding the technology behind it and how to write music in today's time. Because it's a lot more digital, you're not really writing every note by hand. You can, it's very expensive unless you have all the instruments in your house, which if you do, talk to me because I need to rent them. And building a portfolio is the same thing. What you saw with my film reel, that's basically what you do with game music too. You just show footage of the games, you show what different phases of what the music that you wrote for it, and as you build your portfolio, you take out the older ones, you put in whatever you're most proud of and whatever is the most honest representation of who you are now. Having a website, also, just make sure that you are easy to find. Having business cards is really helpful, but if somebody tries to look you up and can't find you, or you're not very, very easy to find online or get a hold of and contact, it kind of sends the wrong signal, and a lot of times it's, I mean, at least for me, when I've gotten business cards from people and I can't find them online, I'm like, okay, I'll come back to it later, and then I realize, oh, I completely forgot about this person. But the other person I remembered because I found their stuff immediately, or they even showed it to me in person. And don't do the same project twice. Same thing, experiment. With games, it will take a lot of time to really experiment with a lot of different genres. But if you try, and you just try, okay, I'm gonna write something horror, and I'm gonna write something sci-fi, I'm gonna write something romantic or cinematic. You just try to do as much as you can, and you figure out very quickly which one you like the most, which one represents you, because everybody writes different types of music. If everybody wrote the same music, we wouldn't have so many different types of composers writing for these games. It would just be one guy doing it all. So experimenting is very important because it also allows to show that you are willing to adapt to whatever the project is. So if somebody can see that, oh, this guy or this girl can actually figure out how to make this work with their style. They haven't done it before, but I've seen their work and I know they can do it. That says a lot, rather than somebody, oh, all they do is write fantasy music, and well, they don't fit all these other projects, so I'm not going to hire them. I'm going to hire this other guy that has done so many different types of music. Okay, breaking into the industry. Now, I see some industry veterans here, so I'm gonna pretend that I know what I'm talking about here. But I'm going to show you what I did, and by breaking into the industry, I mean just familiarizing yourself with everyone around you, building up a network of people that you could call friends and people that you can ask for help and questions whenever you're unsure about something, because everybody was your age at some point. A lot of these industry veterans, and they know where you're at, and they know you're trying to grow. And you know, majority of people are not trying to be condescending or trying to always one up somebody else. A lot of people are very willing to help if you're willing to ask. A lot of people love to help other people and give them advice and just tell them what they know to help them grow, because it makes people feel good. And putting yourself in a position to do that is very important, and learning how to do that. And the quote from Jack Canfield, the same thing, getting out of your comfort zone, meeting others in the same field. You're coming here. This is a good step. You guys came here. That makes a big difference. So smaller studios are more likely to hire somebody that they know rather than just a random resume that they get sent in. If you're on a 4 or 5 person team, chances are you probably knew somebody on the team before you got the job. You don't just, I mean, it happens, but it's rare. You don't just show up and say, oh, okay, you know, this is my reel, along with 100 other people, and then they say, okay, well, I'm desperate, so I'm going to go and pick this guy. Yeah, it does happen. But a lot of times, you talk to people and say, hey, I'm working on this project. I'm working on this game. I don't have somebody for this yet. I don't have a sound designer. I don't have a composer. And they say, oh, well, okay, here's my business card. This is what I've done. I know what you're trying to do. Let's set up a call. Let's talk. I would love to hear more about your project. Let's talk about this and collaborate on this. And that is a very good way to get very far because it doesn't always work out, but you'll get a lot farther than if you just kind of blindly send me a resume and people have no idea who you are and there's no reference. In larger studios, what I have been told, because I don't work for a larger studio, even though I'm working with one. I don't work for them, so I can't say exactly how it is. But what I've been told consistently by every sound designer I've ever talked to is that they were hired because of their experience. They were hired because of what they did, what else they worked on. Not necessarily who they knew, but who you know is extremely important too, because a lot of the jobs that they got were because they worked with somebody else on the team that recommended them. And how did they even get on that team? It's because they worked on another smaller project. And how did they get on that smaller project? Well, they met the guy in college. That's very common. It happens in film a lot too. You look at the movie Black Panther, the composer and the director were friends back in college. So they were classmates, they worked on some student projects together. 10 years later, he makes Black Panther, calls them up and says, hey, you want to be the composer? That's how it happens. Were there other people that were qualified? Of course. Doesn't matter, because you would rather go with somebody that you trust rather than some random person that you found online. Okay, so how do you actually network? Now, network can kind of be a dirty word because people can often associate it with using people or taking advantage of people because you just want to know them because you want to get something out of them. That's a really dangerous way to look at it because the indie game community is very passionate, but a lot of people are extremely nice and very genuine. People who genuinely like to talk to people, like to know who you are interested in you. If you genuinely are interested in other people and what they do, it goes a long way in building lasting relationships with these people. And everybody has experience that they want to share. Everybody has a different walk of life that they come through. And a lot of people are very willing to give this information to you just because you ask, because they have to tell somebody. So I would go to E3. I would go to E3 and I would just be walking around and I would be walking past a random party that's happening outside and it was for a bunch of guys in Microsoft. And I was like, all right, I'll just walk in. So I just walked in the party. There was like 100 people there, so they had no idea who actually worked for Microsoft. I just walked in and I sat down and I just started talking. I started talking to the guy next to me, and I found out he was a lawyer in the game industry. And to my right was Marty O'Donnell, who was a composer for Halo. And he's kind of sat there, he's just kind of chilling, just doing his thing. And I was like, he was super quick to open up and just be like, oh, yeah, cool. Okay, you're a young guy. What are you doing? And he just kept asking me questions, and then like 2 hours went by. And he was just talking, and we're like, okay, this is cool. He actually heard my stuff, and then he gave me feedback on it, which ironically at the time, this was right after Destiny came out. So funny enough, on my SoundCloud, I had a cover of a track that he made by him, one of the tracks from Destiny. So he saw that, and he gave feedback about it. He was super transparent, very honest and open about it, like, hey, this is what you should do. This is what you should be experimenting with, because this will get you there, this will get you here. Super open about it, completely random, and it happened just because I was saying, okay, well, I feel really uncomfortable just going and talking to these people, but let's just go see what happens. What you guys can be doing is attending the IGDA meetings. Now, you've probably heard of the IGDA. Raise your hand if you have heard of the IGDA. Okay, good, so you guys are on top of it. If you're not going to the IGDA meetings, you should, because it is a great way to meet a lot of local developers. And a lot of times, a lot of these developers come from around the country when they relocate to Maryland if they're working for one of the bigger studios like Firaxis or Bethesda. There's Sparky Pants in Baltimore, there's a lot of Sparky Pants guys around here. ZeniMax. So it's very common to be running into these different developers who are all very different, but all very experienced, and they're very happy and open to just talk to you, because they're all just people, just like you. So it takes a lot of practice because you're not going to get it the first time you do it. And it'll be very uncomfortable when you're going out and just talking to people and putting yourself out there. It can be very awkward and it can be uncomfortable because you don't know what to say. You don't really know how people are going to react. But if you stay genuine and you be yourself and you genuinely care about what somebody else has to say, it really makes a difference because you start to then just feel a lot better of being around people. You feel a lot more interested and engaged, saying, okay, I want to know who is this developer? What's their life story? Where are they coming from? And the game industry it's a very closed circle, but it's a very open closed circle. So you will constantly come by people that you've met before and in places that you wouldn't expect. It's very common that I go to E3 and I run into people that are attending IGDA meetings here, just randomly. And these are people from PA, from New York, and they're just everywhere. I'm like, why are you here? Oh, same reason you're here. How do we run into each other? Everybody knows everybody. Just be a good person. Word gets around. All right, so reviewing some concepts. Come down to the end here. Downloading free software, watching tutorials. Very, very easy to get into this. It's very easy to get started. Everybody learns at their own pace, but if you are just doing your best and doing honest work, it really goes a long way. Building a portfolio. Make sure that if somebody is trying to see your work, they can. Make sure that you're easy to find. Having business cards helps a lot. It just has your name, what you do, and your website on it. Doesn't matter that you're not some big developer working for some major company. If they see you're a student, okay, well, if they check out your work and they offer you feedback, that's extremely valuable. Not everybody will, but the ones that do, it makes a big difference because it helps you. They're only trying to help you. It's not like somebody's trying to get you to fail. If you have a professor or if you have some industry veteran, they're not trying to give you advice to make you fail. They want you to succeed. People aren't just generally, they're not trying to put us down all the time. That's not just really what people are. People like to help each other. Although they are out there, Getting out of your comfort zone and networking. Again, networking is, the word is networking, but what it really means is just building lasting relationships with these people that you meet. Because the more effort that you put into just going out there and meeting others who are doing the same thing that you're doing, as time passes, you're all growing together. So think about it. Everybody that is 20, 30 years older than you, and they kind of all know each other, or they're all familiar with each other, at least the ones that are, they all kind of grew up together in the same age. They all started, the world wasn't as connected then. It wasn't as easy to find people. Social media hasn't really been around that long. But this is a very unique situation where it's very easy to do it now. And you're growing up with all these different potential really, really big developers in here that are going to go really far. And you guys are all in that plane. You can all relate. And there's going to be a lot of young people that are going to be coming up to you and asking you questions. And by young, I mean, they could be a year younger than you. They could be even older than you. And it doesn't just, if they're going in the industry and they're just trying to figure it out, you're going to want to help them. You're going to want to give them answers. You're going to want to tell them, this is how I did it. This is the secret. Because you feel good about it. You want to help people. And remember, small studios will hire personally. A large studio will often hire off of experience. Again, relationships are important. You're building up to a point where if you want to work for a large studio, you can do it. Just know what you want. Figure out really what represents you honestly, and focus on that, and that will get you really, really far. Thank you. Now we have only a couple minutes, so I'll ask a few questions, but that is my contact info. If you guys have any questions or want to know anything, I will answer it to the best of my ability, although there are many, many other developers in the IGDA who are very experienced in their fields and are very happy to talk to you as well. So any questions? So collecting samples happens over the course of a few years, especially when you're working on a limited budget. It's important to save up for them to get to buy some nicer ones. But I, earlier on, invested in the Contact Complete bundle. So Contact released this ultimate bundle that's like $10,000 worth of equipment, and they package into this $1,000 package. And that was a huge investment of time, but it has so many samples in there that covers so many different genres that I was able to have cinematic, drums, drum kits, percussion, and a lot of different types of samples all there that I was able to experiment with and just keep. I mean, even to this day, I haven't used all of them yet. There's just so much content in there. So there are a lot of free ones online. but it is worth investing in at least one for now. Just get one that you know is something that you'll be using a lot. Think really hard about it, do your research. There are a lot of affordable options out there. And then as you get more professional and you grow and you're starting to get more gigs or you get a job, you can expand your library as well.